So I took a pause there. I'm back. My phone died, so the previous video kind of stopped, so I couldn't stop and restart it. So if you're watching this in its whole, I've probably managed to stitch them together, but you may notice the lighting and stuff are different. So where I left off was the spirit basically making the same move that oneness makes, individuating into God. God then makes the same move, individuating into spirit, creating a variety of unique experiences and perspectives through which God can experience really God's self and oneness. Then the spirit does the same thing, right? As above, so below, as below, so above, microcosm, macrocosm. Spirits manifesting into individual physical beings like me and like you. And what we carry in us is our own these little squiggly lines represent our own little element or aspect of the elseness that underlies all reality and essentially allowed reality to come into form. And there's a couple different ways to look at this. I've got two in mind, one that I favor. So one way to look at it is there's the core elseness, right? This kind of squiggly, tangled headphones kind of a thing. And one way you could think of it is, okay, if the tangled knot is like this, what God does is essentially breaks it down into chunks or pieces, imbues those into each spirit, and then the spirit then does the same thing, takes its little portion and divides that into sub-portions. And so what each individual being is dealing with is essentially a fragment of the whole, and the purpose being essentially that each individual being, by resolving to some degree the tangling, essentially by allowing unconditional loving awareness to shine on that elseness, it allows some resolution of that elseness during the being's lifetime, which then serves the greater common goal of untangling that elseness to return everything to oneness. That reunion, redemption, rapture element I talked about. The version that I favor a little more, which I hinted at earlier, is really more of the whole being contained in each. And this, I think, really reflects maybe a fundamental nature of what we are. I've seen this concept of a holon, Holon. I think fractal structures reflect this to some degree. The concept of Indra's web. It's all this idea of the entirety being contained in each individual piece, and that each individual piece is like an aspect that contains and reflects the whole. I like to think of each individual being as a point of view, right? Again, to use Alan Watts' phrase, the aperture through which the entirety of the rest of existence looks out upon itself. And so the only unique element of the individual is not some meanness or individualness about me, but the fact that my perspective is distinct from the perspective of the person I'm talking to, but that each of us is essentially a portal or kind of a porthole in a ship through which the entirety can be seen. And what I think is kind of wild is this notion that the entirety is actually seeing the entirety through that individual perspective. And so to kind of maintain that notion, what I'm thinking of here for the smaller ones is more the element of, if we think of it like this big tangled knot of headphone wire, or if we think of it kind of like a jewel with facets, God has the entirety of it and the entire kind of omni perspective. Each individual spirit then gets a look at it. So if it's like a jewel, it's a look at it from a certain angle with a certain tilt in this dimension, a certain tilt in this dimension, and each individual spirit has its own unique tilt. That way, when God looks through the spirits, God can essentially reconstruct the jewel by seeing it from all its different perspectives. And then likewise, when the spirit breaks it down, it takes its own individual view and perhaps then breaks it up into another series of sub-views. So in other words, each individual being has the entire elseness within it, but what is unique about the individual is kind of the angle of view or the perspective on the elseness. And that by combining all the individual perspective of all the individual beings, you recreate the perspective had by the spirit collectively, and then the spirit collectively recreate, by the shifting of angles, the perspective, the basically unbound perspective that God has on the elseness. And so what we get into here, this I think is a theory on the origin of suffering. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the perspective, say, of this individual life form, right? Perhaps that's me, perhaps that's you. The spoke off the hub of spirit, a physically manifested being experiencing the flow of time and space in a singular reality, right? A reality where there is this eraser. It's not, to my experience, right, quantum in the sense of splitting and being multiple possible erasers at once. In the flow of time, I experiencing it having singularity, discrete borders, right, and a oneness to it. And you, from your perspective, see the same thing. So, what we have here is that same dynamic. We have reunion, redemption, and rapture. And the way it plays out is in the theater of the human heart. And so if we take that little squiggle we had before, right, let's say that that's the squiggle associated with the eye. That squiggle is essentially a projection, right, or a kind of an emanation from the spirit out into the body. Again, it's the spirit that kind of, you could think of it as solve its puzzle or untangle its knot, manifests into all these different lives to give itself at maximum density and maximum singularness the experience of intimacy with the tangle, intimacy with the knotting. And the first noble truth of the Buddha is that life is suffering. This is maybe an attempt on my part to map that into this cosmology. So the spirit takes its tangle, projects it into the being, and I like to think of it as kind of this DNA, this little squiggly code in the heart of the being. In other words, our suffering, our experience of resisting reality, of feeling internal friction, of feeling tension, of feeling knotting, of feeling coiling, of feeling shut down, of feeling constricted, is basically the manifestation of this elseness down into maximum physical reality and density. And so the wild thing that I believe happens here is the way the spirit gets this tangle into the heart isn't merely that when the baby is conceived or the baby is born, it's not like this magically appears. I don't believe so. What I believe happens is that what we think of as life, as the story of our life, at least the initial phase of it, is the spirit manifesting situations in life that generate traumas. And these traumas essentially stitch or etch into the heart the very design of the elseness in the spirit. In other words, it's kind of like a tattoo or a scar that the spirit puts into the human heart, so that then the spirit, which is also God, which is also oneness, can experience this elseness with a maximum of feeling and intimacy, because we're no longer in this etheric realm where everything is perhaps more spatially or geometrically experienced. We're here at the realm of physical being, where literally with the beating of the heart, you can feel, at least I can feel, the friction of what I believe is this tangled confusion energy there. And I think the notion is, by having this experience with maximum intimacy, that's really how the knot is able to be realized, experienced, and then ultimately untangled. And so the way it's going to do it is, from our perspective, by messing with us, right? So it may introduce a trauma in the birthing process, right? So you get kind of a tangle that way, right? This is now etched in our body, etched in our memory, perhaps even on the subconscious or unconscious level. But it's affecting us. It's creating a trauma, like a trapped energy in us that keeps us to some degree stuck in the past and keeps us recreating the past in the present. We get another etch perhaps if we're physically abused as a child, if we experience perhaps a divorce or a break in the family. Another one comes perhaps with significant deaths of loved ones. We go through a significant health crisis, right? My belief is these things are not in any way random. And while we experience them in physical reality as other people inflicting on them, right? The parent inflicting physical or even sexual abuse on the child, the virus or the bacteria inflicting the disease on the physical body, right? I believe what's happening there is the spirit is actually creating in life these scenarios to deliberately stitch this trauma pattern into the heart. What this then does is allows the being the opportunity to experience tangling, which is now a trauma pattern in the being, with that full intimacy. And I think in the youth of spirit, right, what we see is essentially the drama pattern, right, which I represent with the triangle, right? Here's suffering in the middle. You have the hero, you have the villain, and you have the victim, right? The hero battles the suffering, fights against it, right, treats it as an enemy. The villain, which is often a creation of the hero, then spreads the suffering, which then creates victims who endure the suffering, essentially become like a load for the suffering, but don't really transform the suffering or learn from it. They essentially make the suffering their story, and they now continuously suffer because they're stuck in this position, which then empowers further heroes, which creates further villains, which creates further victims. You could see the cycle we have here. This, I believe, is the cycle of human war, the cycle of child abuse and sexual abuse that you see get passed down from generation to generation. It's human will and human energy getting stuck in this triangular pattern, and all the while this tangle of suffering in the middle doesn't really get resolved. It just gets passed around from person to person, from individual to individual, and within individuals from moment to moment. The aha moment, the maturity, the moment when the spirit really enters a period of no longer just kicking the suffering can down the road or passing it off to others or passing it off to our future self, but really begins to actually address and heal this, is when there's some kind of crisis, some kind of maybe even kind of like a midlife crisis type thing, where the spirit begins to realize the foolishness of this game and really the folly of this game, and begins to realize that perhaps what the spirit is meant to do is to actually experience the suffering on a deep level and not pass it on, not fight it, and not endure it as though it's merely some cross to bear or some burden to handle. To actually try to alchemize or transform this suffering in a way that releases this energy, allows this coiled, stiffened, crimped energy to relax. And instead of being this tangle, and now it can be this smooth, flat noodle that no longer resists or traps energy, but allows energy to trap through, right? Instead of being the filament in the light bulb that has all the resistance, that shoots off all the light, it essentially is now more like the wire that allows energy to transfer through with minimum resistance. And the way someone does this, I think, is essentially what the Buddha described, which is accepting that suffering is a feature of life, not seeing suffering as something that's being inflicted on us from the outside by external factors, but is actually something arising within us constantly, almost a feature of our existence DNA, and dedicating ourselves to the difficult work of essentially managing and then healing our suffering. Managing suffering, I mean taking one of the Buddhist teachings, which is do no harm, practice virtue, and discipline the mind. This, I think, is essentially kind of a harm management technique, a way within the cycle of the drama to try to reduce, right, or mitigate the amount of suffering that's getting passed along. And we set this up essentially as a discipline within ourselves while we undertake the deeper process, which can be a process of many lifetimes, which is the process of actually reconfiguring ourselves so that we're no longer a node in this game, but instead we're something more akin to a cycling inward into our suffering state, and then also a cycling outward, the uncoiling. And our uncoiling is essentially the uncoiling of this knot as well. So what do I mean by that? When suffering arises in the spirit in its state of immaturity, again, it gets bounced around in the triangle of drama, right? Hero, villain, and victim. The more mature being will recognize that suffering is its own creation and give itself the gift of mercy, and give mercy to the suffering by essentially trying to cultivate a state similar to that of God, which is unconditionally loving awareness. So basically the spirit in its maturity, instead of going down into the drama games we see at density, tries to emulate upward to the level of God and practice this art of unconditional loving awareness. When it has that state of unconditional loving awareness, right, which we can see reflected in the states of the heart that Buddhist practice talks about, right? Equanimity, right, which is a state of poise. Compassion, which is a state of recognizing and appreciating the quality of suffering, including how suffering feels like harm to the being, but is really just detracting and kind of stiffening and vibrating within the being, creating a state of unease or dis-ease. We have metta, the loving kindness. This is the state of basically cultivating a gladness toward being and a state of, if not affection, a state of affinity toward all that is. All right, let's see, am I going to blank on the fourth state here? Yes, sundita, sympathetic joy. This is basically recognizing that the joy and also the sadness of others, because of the state of oneness, because we all emanate from the same source, is essentially our joy or our pain as well. And so we essentially realize that we share in the states of others. And so if we open the human heart and we allow those qualities of the heart to flow, what we'll find is we can get out of the drama game, get more into the heart process, and begin to untangle and uncoil this elseness, which is participating in the gradual process by which God essentially undoes the manifestation of the universe and returns everything back to a state of oneness. And so we can see the reunion, redemption, and rapture playing out in the microcosm of the individual. When the individual essentially in their state of being, right, they have the experience of suffering arise within them, right? And instead of falling into the drama game, they decide to play this other game, the God game, the creator game. They open the heart, they cultivate unconditional loving awareness, right? They practice and emulate and cultivate those qualities of the heart. And in so doing, they allow this tangle, they allow God's love to shine through on the tangle and very gradually soften it. Very gradually allow that tangle to enter the state more of that release noodle, right? To go less from the resistor to the wire. And that same reunion and redemption and rapture I talked about there plays out here, right? This trauma from our past, right? That being abused as a child, going through that terrifying life event, right? Those things come back to us now. But instead of being our tormentors, instead of being our haunters, instead of being the forces that drive us into this drama game where we're inflicting suffering back on ourselves, inflicting suffering back on others, we essentially reestablish a connection. We have a reunion with it. And we re-accept that it is something that happened in our lives. But instead of treating ourselves as the victim to who, like it happened to us, or the hero, we're the ones who have to battle and fight it off, or the villain, we push it off onto others so we don't have to continue to feel it ourselves. We feel it. We feel it as rawly as we can, as nakedly as we can, and openly as we can, while also cultivating this vibration of love. Essentially, we could think of ourselves being kind of like the reed in a wind instrument, and we try to resonate that vibration of love to create a welcoming environment here. Because every time this trauma revisits us, right, by coming up as a feeling or coming up as a thought or coming up as a memory, right, and because it's a tangled one, right, because it originates from the core negativity of elseness, it's going to have this negative quality to it. It's going to hurt. It's going to disturb us. It's going to distract us. It's going to be tempting us to do some kind of negative conduct, right, to lie, to cheat, to take, to abuse, to do something like that. If when this comes up, we can recognize it as essentially our inner child coming back to us for healing, right? A trapped version of ourselves in the past that's coming back now and asking to be set free. If that's the attitude and the poise we can take toward the experience of suffering, now we begin to do that God work, that spirit work, and we begin to untangle that coil and allow it to return to the state of oneness, and thereby allow ourselves to return to the state of oneness as well. And so the reunion is that recognition, this is not some tormentor. This is actually my past self reuniting with me in my present, trying to get some kind of commonality, trying to get a state of oneness again. The redemption being when, by cultivating the heart qualities, we allow that to untangle. Now we've redeemed our present self and our past self by bringing ourselves back to a single state. And then rapture, being when that tangle, either the whole tangle or some little portion of it, is finally untangled, right, is unstiffened, is uncoiled. That energy is then, by rapture, returned upward, right, into spirit, can be returned upward into God, and then ultimately can be returned upward into oneness. Now, one of the games that plays out here, right, I haven't been talking much about the anti-God, the evil. If only it were so simple that we just recognize that, oh yeah, simple game, and then just do that, we would go from the drama game, which I call the war dance, up into the love dance, right, into spirit, into God, into oneness, and it all could happen pretty quickly. But evil is there, and evil is the guardian, right, of this knot. Evil is the guardian of that seam that is stitched into our heart. And the way it works is misdirection, deception, and the insistent misattribution of suffering's cause. Evil will constantly try to drive us back into the drama game. And the way it'll do it, it'll constantly try to blame this on either us or others. And it'll constantly try to have a negative view on things, right? These are the hallmarks of evil, or in Buddhist terminology, Mara, at work. And Mara's game is to try to get us away from that heart practice, away from accepting the fact of suffering, experiencing suffering, and allowing suffering to uncoil in its own time, right? Not forcing it, not looking at it and wondering, when are you going to uncoil? When are you going to stop tormenting me? Right now we're back in that drama game. Embracing it as actually a gift, as an opportunity to do the dance of God, the dance of reunion, redemption, and rapture. Mara ain't about that. Mara is about sustaining elseness, right? And again, when we want to see Mara as bad, Mara's sustaining of elseness is the sustaining of time and space. It's the sustaining of reality. It's sustaining that core nucleating point that allows the bubble of the universe to continue to exist in what is otherwise an undifferentiated, unphysical, and untemporal oneness. So Mara, just like I was showing over here, right, kind of builds the mirrors or the sand traps around it. Mara will constantly cling on to that suffering and do all kinds of games to try to distract us from it. And the image I have for Mara is of a disco ball. Right, this resembles a disco ball very minimally, but there it is. Why a disco ball? Because it's mirrors in all directions that shows you that you cannot actually see the ball itself. All you see is what the ball is reflecting. And that's what Mara essentially does to all our suffering. Our suffering comes up, our inner eye looks down and goes, what is happening? What is this I feel? And Mara goes, I'll tell you what, it's something bad. And not only is it something bad, it's a problem. Why is it a problem? Let's get into solution mode. Let's get into fix-it mode. Oh, it's a problem. Be a hero. Battle it. Right? Launch your holy war against it to destroy it. Oh, it's a problem. Oh God, it's too much to handle. Get this off of me. That's what the villain does, right? They push the suffering away from themselves onto others. They justify it by creating some kind of anti-hero story. It's all nonsense. It's just a villain trying to get the suffering away from themselves, trying to push it off, right? The aversion in Buddhist terminology. Boom. Who do they push it off onto? Well, whoever it gets pushed off onto potentially becomes a victim. They're the ones who feel that suffering, like wave after wave hitting them. And because they're falling prey to Mara's games, they think, this is happening to me. This is something unfair and wrong that is being inflicted upon me. So the victim bears their cross, right? They bear their burden, and they wear it like a perverse badge of honor. And I don't mean, when I'm describing this, to isolate individuals. I don't mean to say this person's a victim, this person's a hero, this person's a villain. Even if that is kind of the mask that they're publicly identified with, each of us is the hero, the villain, and the victim, right? Each of us in our interior lives, and as those interior lives get manifested or get played out in physical reality, each of us plays these roles. So please don't fall into the game of being like, okay, you're talking about like Hitler here, and you're talking about this person here, this person here. That's not what I mean. I get that those can be mapped on, but that I think is Mara, again, trying to externalize things. See yourself as your own hero, your own villain, your own victim. See Mara as yourself, right? After all, you are oneness, and Mara is with us in oneness. We are Mara. See the suffering as yourself. See the heart as yourself. The more you can have a unifying and accepting concept of what it means to be you, of what it means to be me, the closer we can get to emulating the state of oneness, and the easier it'll be to switch from the drama game to the heart dance. So, every time suffering arises, every single time Mara is there to try to distract us out of the heart dance into the drama game. What the wise one does, right? What the Buddha did. Buddha saw Mara and didn't play hero and said, "Get the hell out of here, Mara. I ban you. I renounce you." Didn't play the villain by posing as Mara. Didn't play the victim by going, "Boo-hoo, man, I'm sitting here under the Bodhi tree trying to achieve enlightenment, and you're messing with me, man. Get the hell out of here." If the Buddha had done that, right, the Buddha's resonant energy would have dropped out of the love dance he was doing and gone down into the drama game. Boom, the connection would have been broken, and at least during that meditation, or at least on that streak of concentration, would not have achieved enlightenment in my conception of things. What did the Buddha do? The Buddha recognized Mara, right? This is the key, recognition. The Buddha saw Mara, and the Buddha said, "I know you. I know you. I see what you do. You distract me from the truth. You misdirect me from the truth. You mislead me. You try to parade temptations and threats and things in front of me to get me to lose the realization that everything is one, right? That essentially the core state is non-self, right? Anatta, which I believe is the state of oneness. It's a state essentially of nothingness or non-existence, right? And the Buddha talks about this. So if the Buddha is able to recognize Mara, Mara, you are the deceiver, you are the distractor, you are the misguider, and is able to say it without any ill will, without any malice, just recognition, game, recognize, game, right? Buddha's like, "Oh, I'm the Buddha, and you're Mara." Game, recognize, game. You're actually kind of the shell or the husk of the seed that I'm trying to get through. The seed I'm trying to get through, the sunflower seed here, that gives me my nourishment and my healing, is my own suffering, right? And if I can then experience the flow of my suffering and the flow of my own awareness, and because I have opened my heart so fully, and because I'm maintaining a poise, and because my being is vibrating, right? Not just at the level of I, but at the level of uppercase I, at the level of God, even channeling the spirit of oneness, right? If these are normally 4 different lenses that have to be looked at separately, in the Buddha, picture them all coming into a single focus, right? All 4 lenses, which are maybe sometimes stacked, kind of like planets out of alignment, now they're all planets in alignment. They're all in full eclipse of each other. In the Odyssey, right, when Odysseus comes home, what is one of the things he has to do to prove his worth, to prove who he is? He has to shoot an arrow through rings that are lined up concurrently, right? I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's actually reflection on a mythic level of what this dance is, which is allowing our oneness, our godness, our spiritness, and our physical beingness to simultaneously in superposition coexist. And I think the way we do that is by resonating at a frequency of unconditional loving awareness, and that's what essentially brings them into this alignment. So the Buddha mind is what recognizes Mara for Mara, allows the husk to fall off. It now has its seed of suffering, and it allows the seed of suffering to bask in this light of recognition, right? And bask in the light of unconditionally loving awareness. And it's the basking in this light that allows the suffering to untangle. And once all the suffering, all the pattern of suffering in the being, right, this entire code which was stitched onto the being through the traumas of its life. For the Buddha, it was originally the traumas of leaving his palace and going out and realizing, holy hell, me and everyone I know is going to get sick, right? And is going to get old and then is going to die, right? Something he didn't realize while he was living the cush life in the palace. That then created this disease, right? This dis-ease in him, this uneasiness, this sense of, man, I'm not cool with this, right? This is not okay. But instead of fighting it and fighting death and fighting old age, right? And fighting illness, right? Or being a victim and saying boo-hoo and trying to hide from it, or being a villain and inflicting them on others, maybe in some weird experiment to try to learn more about it, the Buddha did the wise practice of saying, no, I'm going to be a vessel of healing. I am going to be a filament through which suffering is not just shown out and put out onto the rest of the world. In me, suffering is resolved. In me, suffering is recognized, right, and is allowed to come to its natural resolution. In me, myself and my suffering, which is myself and my inner child, myself and myself that's trapped in the past, have reunion, redemption, and rapture. And so when the Buddha does that and meditates essentially with that quality for long enough, his suffering is able to be uncoiled, and he is able to actually achieve within himself, the state of oneness, because he no longer has that elseness core to his identity. He is a portion or an element of the godness that essentially emulates God. He has achieved godness in beingness by actually fully resolving his share of the elseness, or his aspect of the elseness. A rare bird indeed, doesn't even get gifted to us, at least to our knowledge, within each generation, but he serves as a beacon, as an indicator to what we're all trying to do, which is the heart dance. And so when we emulate the Buddha, and when we walk in the Buddha's footsteps, and when we try to practice the Buddha's teachings and achieve Buddhahood for ourselves, I think what we're really trying to do is to mature out of the drama game. We practice the renunciation to say, okay, even though I still get pulled into this game, I'm just still not going to play it, right? Because a purist might say, okay, while I'm here in the heart dance, I'm going to do the heart dance, but when I fall back into the drama game, well, I'm just going to fall into that again. Renunciation is what allows you to say, no, if I'm in the drama game, I'm just not going to play, right? And that may mean non-participation, right? I think this is what Gandhi did. I think this is what Martin Luther King did. They just said, I'm not going to practice violence. You can come up to me and sick your dogs on me, spray your fire hoses at me, hit me with your batons. I'm not going to, you want to turn me, you're going to be the villain trying to turn me into the victim. I'm not going to accept the victimhood, right? And I'm not going to put myself as the hero who's going to fight you, right? I'm not going to take what you do to me as justification to hold a grudge. And I'm not going to take what you're doing me as a justification to fight back against you. I'm going to essentially stick to my heart dance. And if it's difficult for me to do a heart dance in the midst of the trauma, right, what a amazing level of poise that would require. You at least say, I'm going to take it and I'm not going to give it back. And then when I'm able to get back to my meditation cushion, or I'm able to get back to my place of peace, my place of temporary safety, I can get back into my heart dance, do work on any victimhood or herohood that just accumulated, and then get back to the deeper work of working out those core traumas that it pre-existed, the traumas that were just inflicted upon me. Okay, so let me do one last thing here. I know I've been going on for a while here, but let me show one other dynamic, and this is another metaphor for how Mara works. And this is really more on the individual level. So I introduced before, had this concept of the yin-yang. Right, reflecting, essentially the state of oneness is the state where everything, including this line, is fully essentially dissolved and harmonized, such that it creates a full balance, a full kind of net neutral charge, and so there's no manifestation, right? This then manifests in the world as good and evil. It then manifests in each individual human heart as good and evil as well. And this line, I like to think of as being the line maintained by Mara, right? So that disco ball. And what we think of here, what I'm trying to get to here is essentially the creation of me-ness, of ego-ness, and how I think that happens within this framework. So we have everything at the spirit level, right? The spirit then is like the hub in the middle of the wheel. It's going to shoot out physical beings like me, like you. We then have our core little bit of elseness, which we then restitch onto our hearts in the form of trauma, in the form of the life events that occur in our life. Now what happens is, as we go through life, as we experience these traumas, and really just as we go through the conditioning of human society, the conditioning of being in a family, and we condition ourselves to be me. What does it mean to be Joe Clark, right? What does it mean to be you? We form some concept of that. Well, how do I tend to act in certain scenarios? How do I tend to respond when people do things? And what we start to do is we start to create a good pile and a bad pile, right? An acceptable pile and an unacceptable pile. And these are ultimately, I think, expressions or extensions of our core suffering pattern. And so for me, it may play out as, yeah, I speak, when someone addresses me in certain ways, I will try to respond in certain tones, or I'll try not to respond in certain tones. And what this essentially does is it creates a pattern of repression. Someone comes up to me and goes, hey, Joe, how are you going? I don't go, and like jump at them. In states of inebriation, admittedly, we see this repression and inhibition go away, so you start to see more of those raw and wild expressions come out. But we essentially create this system of self-repression so that those aspects of ourselves that we think are appropriate or wise, or that we just are conditioned to express, do come out, right? That's what we would call the light. And then those things that we think are inappropriate, unacceptable, unwelcome, not us, anti-us, we put in the darkness. And then Carl Jung talked about this, right? This then becomes the shadow self, which is just as much us, but it's that part of ourself that we repress, even internally, even from our own conception of ourself, because we've either been told or really we've accepted the idea from either others or from ourselves that it's unacceptable, that it's unwise, and so that we just shouldn't do it. And so essentially what starts happening is aspects of ourselves, I like to think of it as little hearts, get broken. And so maybe kind of a simplistic example here, right, is if in situations I can be either expressive or withdrawn, right? Say that's one quality. The heart, the wholeness, right, which reflects the oneness, is the combination of the outwardness, the expressiveness, maybe the type A, the assertiveness, combined with the more passiveness, the withdrawnness, the reticence, what's the word I'm looking for? The introvert. These, again, are just sides of a pole, right? Complements of each other. But we may get the lesson early on, hey, either generally or in these settings, you should do this, you should do that. We then internalize it and say, okay, in these settings, I'm going to behave this way or I'm going to behave that way. That creates this fracture within us. So then what we end up with is a heart that's separated, right? And it's separated, broken apart by these experiences of thinking right and wrong. And so this one, which we deemed unacceptable, goes into the darkness. This one, which we deemed acceptable, goes up into the light. And the mistake we make is every time we think, oh, well, who am I? What am I? What I'm about? We look into our hearts, but we only see what's in the light. And we deny what's in the darkness, or are just utterly ignorant of what's in the darkness. And so we'll live our lives believing we know our whole selves, but all we know is the whole light, right? Which is only a part of ourselves, a fragmented version of ourselves. And so we'll feel this sense of incompleteness, like, God, isn't there more to life? Isn't there more to everything? But we externalize it. We think, well, the world should give me more quality vacations, a spouse or a loved one or a friend who meets more of my needs or satisfies more of our desires, right? This is that kind of immaturity game where we're externalizing things. But in our maturity, if we start to go, wait a minute, maybe this game is all actually inside of me. And maybe what I'm supposed to do, instead of keeping everything in the light and keeping everything in the darkness and identifying myself with this and disidentifying with this, is to actually break down this wall. Or maybe soften this wall so that there could be a flow and a reconnection, so that these hearts pieces, right, kind of like Africa and South America that were divided at one point, right, they still have that puzzle piece combination to each other. They can actually have their reunion, redemption, and rapture within the human heart. If only that were that easy. Why is it not? Because Mara, the evil one, the deceiver, is constantly guarding this wall of yin-yang, is constantly keeping those parts of the heart separate from each other. How? By convincing them that they're enemies, right? By convincing them that they're not the same. By convincing them that they're not each other, that they don't belong together, that this divide is a wise divide, is a fair divide, maybe even a loving divide to ourselves. And so what I think of here, I've called this, and I say I called it, I just come up with this myself, or it came to me, is Esh, right? Energy seeking healing, energy sharing healing. What these two want to do is to come back together and be whole. Because each time these qualities which get divided are separate, we feel separateness in our lives. We feel incompleteness and unwholeness in our lives. When they recombine, the more that happens, the more this alchemical process of a heart essentially reunifying happens, the more whole we become, the more whole we feel, the more whole we are in our interactions with ourselves and with others. And you see these people, these gifted, positive people who go around and spread joy everywhere. How do they do it? I think what they've done is they've had this inner work occur within them where those broken pieces of their heart have come back together. And they now are able to shine that light out onto others, and others kind of pick up on their wholeness, kind of feel their vibration, and at least while they're around them, kind of sharing it. It's kind of like this radius or this glow of warmth that's around them, and they get little feels of this love dance, this reunion, redemption, and rapture. You also see people call them kind of cancerous people, negative people, toxic people, people who are too caught up in the war dance. They'd have that, but in inverse. They have a negative vibe that's going out from them. Now, of course, we need to recognize every single one of them is us, and every single one of them, what they're experiencing, what they're doing, is unfolding in the perfect manifestation of creation along with everything else. So it's a mistake to villainize the bad people or lionize or create as heroes the good people. We may selfishly enjoy it because we like how it feels to be around them, or we may think, hey, you're helping me on my spiritual journey, or I'm averse to you because I don't like you. But can you see how the very roots of suffering that the Buddha talks about are in those attitudes, right? Being infatuated with the good person, being averse to the bad person. What are these symptoms of? The core ignorance, the core realization that every person and everything is manifesting perfectly in its time. The more we can do that and stop obsessing over things outside of ourselves and get back to the inner work, now we're doing work more like the Buddha. Now we're doing work more like God. Now we're actually serving ourselves on a very deep level and serving the rest of our species, the rest of the universe really on a deep level, by playing our part in uncoiling and unknotting our own suffering. So energy seeking healing, energy sharing healing, these two pieces of the broken heart, which are now separated across the divide, right, maintained by Mara, they're constantly trying to get to each other. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on a portion of this border, okay? We're going to do kind of an inset. All right, so we've got the dividing line. You've got South America over here, right? You've got Africa over here, right? These pieces of the broken heart that are trying to reconnect. This dividing line is maintained by Mara, right? The disco ball of confusion. And what happens is these energies cannot see each other across this divide. What they see here, right, this disco ball is kind of manifested here. You can think of this like a hall of mirrors. And so when they look, all they see is bounced back on themselves, right? And any sense they get, like if this one kind of calls out to this one across the divide, Mara negatively alchemizes it into negative energy, right? So if this one is calling out saying, I love you, I miss you, please come to me. This one here is, I hate you, right? Get away from me, right? I loathe you, I never want to see you again. Confusion, right? Misinterpretation, misunderstanding. These are the games of Mara. This is how Mara sustains separateness, sustains elseness, sustains the very universe itself. What we do, right, as conscious beings, is if we can then do the work of the Buddha, the reunion, redemption, and rapture, right, emulate God, what we can begin to do is essentially soften this wall. Or, what I like to think of, and I like to have a little fun with this, I like to think we can become kind of a DJ, right? And we can play this song of Esh. We can go into our hearts recognize this division, but turn this disco ball from a tool of confusion into a tool of reunion. And so what we do is we get up there, we've got our headphones on, and we're playing the song of love. And we are speaking the truth into this divide. And we are saying, you and you are the same. You and you are one. And what divides you is confusion. What divides you is misunderstanding. What divides you is falsehood. And invite and essentially create a setting where this wall can come down, or at least soften enough to allow these two to recognize each other, right? Have the reunion. Oh my God, I am you, you are me, we are one. We are actually greater than the sum of our parts. When we reunite, we are not just two broken pieces that are stuck together. Just as that wall came down between them, this fissure, or this rift between, when they're fully reunited, they're not some broken heart that has that fissure on it. Initially they are, but when they reharmonize, they become a whole heart again, greater than the sum of the parts. Notice how this is reflecting a microcosm of the macrocosm of oneness, right? When God and anti-God are restored in one, it's not like they're God and anti-God floating in separate bubbles in oneness. They are utterly intermixed. They are utterly now interbeing. That's what you have here, the restored heart. So we, right, what I think, like me making this video, going blah, 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 you listening to it going, or no, or I don't know. We, I think, are these DJs, right, in this metaphor, who get to preside over the dance. We basically get to come in, recognize we're Mara, and say, you know what? I'm sick of playing Mara. I'm getting a little emotional right now. I'm sick of creating division in myself. I'm sick of inflicting that division on other people. I'm sick of playing the games that I usually play. My drama games, which just perpetuate it. And sometimes numb me from it. I get high on being the hero. I get kind of a twisted high on being the villain. I get a self-pity out of being the victim. I want better for myself. I want more for myself. And I think we reach a point where we say, enough. Enough. And then we say, what now? And that's where we can look to the Buddha. And I keep using the Buddha. He's the example I know. He's certainly not the only source of information or wisdom in this regard. But we say, hey, let's turn this disco ball from a tool of deception into a tool of reunification. Let's turn this from a dissonant, discordant beat that divides the hearts, drives them away from each other, kind of a noise pollution. Let's play a beautiful song. Let's play a song of reunion. Let's play a song of reminding, a song of deep remembering, a song that honors the oneness within each divided part. And when we can redirect our will toward that purpose, toward that truly divine purpose, we can become an agent for change, first within ourselves, and then emanating outwards into others and into the entirety of not just the universe, but the entirety of beingness. We can turn tragedy into love. It's never too late. Not for our species, not for our generation, not for any individual nation, not for any individual community, not for any individual family, not for any individual person. And in these tears are a testament to the difficulty of this path. I hope a testament to the will. Because when you put yourself to this work over and over and over, it's hard not to feel like a victim of it. Right? And when you put yourself to it and it works, it's hard not to feel like the hero. And when you feel like, forget it, frack it, I'm done with it, I'm going to go indulge for a while, I'm going to go be addicted for a while, it's hard not to feel like the villain. And so when I talked before about the drama triangle and then the more virtuous circle, that's not just like this is step one and this is step two, and once you are done with this, you're doing this and it's easy. It's a back and forth game. It's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 4 steps forward, 1 step back. It's staccato, right? It's left and right. It's strobing. We will simultaneously, in a single moment, experience the drama dance or the drama game and the reunion, redemption, rapture dance, and then back to this. And the experience from the inside for me has been feeling like I get pulled apart. And I think that pain I'm feeling right now and those tears that are flowing are partly remembering how hard it's been to get again and again to come back to that DJ booth and to say, I'm going to play a song of love. I'm going to play a harmonizing song for myself. No matter how much it hurts, no matter how unfair it feels or how difficult it is, I'm going to play that song as a gift to myself. And hopefully as a gift to everything else too. And so if we can feel that arising of suffering as a reminder to Esh that we have energy seeking healing, right? An energy that wants to share healing with each other. And what we do, we as the willful agents, we as the ones who seem to exercise free will in these spaces of choice, we have this choice. Fall into the drama game, right? Or do the dance of love. And doing the dance of love is really a dance of surrender. It's not about virtue. It's not about stuffing ourselves full of good phrases. Mantras certainly help, but we shouldn't be fooling ourselves that we're being good in those moments. What we're doing is we're essentially allowing the inherent goodness within us, the inherent godness within us to shine through by not putting our agendas or our egos or addictions in between ourselves and these broken hearts. We allow the light of God to shine through our spirit, to shine through our beingness, to bounce off that disco ball down into this division so that these can have the remembering and the realization and to come. And we tell ourselves it's some kind of rescue or some kind of glorious act. This is a reflection of the drama game when we remind ourselves that it's really reunion, redemption, and rapture, not just with those forgotten elements of ourselves, but with those parts of the very oneness that what we are that's been separated through the dance of the entirety of the universe. We can realize the sacredness of what we're doing, the blessedness and the divinity of what we're doing, and we can allow it to unfold within ourselves and hopefully create virtuous cycles within that allow it to happen more and more often, more and more fluidly, more and more coherently, with more and more of a sustained flow, until we, either in this lifetime or a future lifetime, we, the spirit, finally manifest as a physical being, as Buddha. And I believe essentially the process of going from God to spirit to individual being back into oneness is every single spirit essentially manifesting its own Buddhahood that allows it to be essentially like in a flash of reunion, redemption, rapture, that flash back into oneness. The being experiences non-self in life as a manifested being. I mean, it's so hard to imagine. But once every spirit has had its Buddha life and goes back in, the universe recollapses into oneness, which then remanifests as a new universe. But it's not like that old universe is wiped out or eliminated or obliviated. Quite the contrary. That new universe then has all the memories, all the experiences, all the beauty, all the dramas and the struggles, all the glories baked back into its very DNA, so that when that next universe comes, it's not the first time around. It's not starting with a clean board, a clean Etch-a-Sketch. The legacy of all the universes and all the experiences and all the individuals that have existed before are baked and woven back into the experience of every other individual. So when you are doing your dances, when you're having experiences in drama, when you're having your experiences, be heartened, find courage. Remember, you are carrying in your very heart and in your very being the legacy, not only of all that is now, but all that has ever been, and really in anticipation of all that has ever will be. You in this moment are the entirety of all possible time and all possible space, experiencing the singularity of what is.